Normally, adults aren't allowed to dress up at Disney, but costumes are encouraged at the Disney Villains After Hours party, and I plan to take full advantage of that. So this is how I made my DIY Maleficent horns. I'm going to the Villains After Hours party as Maleficent in her humanoid form, and my husband, ever accommodating, is going as her dragon form. So I need to get pretty good at these horns. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell for a notification when I upload how I do his costume. I've made a ton of Mickey ears, but I've never made horns before, so this is going to be a pretty interesting challenge for me. I'm going to be wearing these ears, running around the parks. It's going to be crazy and hectic, probably crowded, and it's going to be dark. So I'm mostly going into this looking for something that is quick, cheap, easy, and comfortable. I'm not worried about getting a super realistic, perfect replica of Angelina Jolie's horns from the movie or anything like that. I'm not going for perfection here. I'm going for adequate, easy, and affordable. So I started with some plastic Easter eggs. I already had these randomly around the house from a previous project last year, but they're really easy to find this time of year and they're super duper cheap. And it really doesn't matter what color you get because you're going to end up covering the entire thing in the end. So just whatever you can find that's cheap and easy. For me, I definitely wanted to get some that were a little bit on the larger size because there are definitely some of these plastic eggs that are definitely smaller. At first I played with using the entire egg to get the extra length and size, but then I realized pretty quickly that would leave me with a round, semi-spherical bottom, and I'd have to figure out how to get that to sit flat against my head. So it makes more sense to me to go ahead and split the egg apart and just use the wider, squatter bottom portion of the egg. That way you already have a flat section that can sit smoothly against your head, and you can go ahead and keep the extra length from having the two different portions of the egg. Then you have the two sections of the egg that you can put together, and you can rotate it and make it go into all different angles and different directions, and that's going to be very helpful with a project like Maleficent's horns because there are some very complex curves going in and out, forward, back. It's a very complicated shape, so having that maneuverability is very helpful with the eggs. Once I had the two egg sections together in the angle and position that I wanted them in, I just secured them in place with some clear packing tape that held them in place in relationship to each other, as well as was able to fill in any of the gaps that are made by having those round shapes. Next, I tore off a reasonably sized piece of aluminum foil. I didn't want to have to deal with a lot of it at once. I wanted to definitely be able to keep little sections going the way I wanted them. I didn't want to be overwhelmed with having a lot of extra foil. So definitely kept my pieces fairly small, and I started with a sort of flat area in the middle that I taped to the plastic egg to secure it in place, and then I just mushed it down and contorted it to get all the different curves and dimensions that I needed. You really got to work to get all those complex curves. They go up and away from the face, but then they go out and then they come back in. There's a whole lot of twisting, turning curves, and it's really hard to get all of those just right, while also making sure that you start wider at the base and continually and gradually get narrower as you get towards the point. Once I had the basic shape laid out, I went ahead and sort of smoothed over any of the rough, textured parts of the foil with some more tape to get one smooth, solid form. If you find a gap or a hole, just go ahead and tape over that. You don't necessarily have to fill the entire space with foil. I just used a lot of tape anytime I had a weird little divot, and a couple layers of the tape over that really covered that up and smoothed it out without having to worry about getting any extra stuff smushed in there. Once I was done with the first horn, it was time to make the second one, and that's definitely the hard part. Making all those complex twisty turning curves is hard enough, but then trying to mirror it exactly and have another one that is exactly the same going in the other directions while keeping the sizes and proportions similar, not easy. And it's a good thing I was not going for perfection here, because they're definitely not perfectly symmetrical, but it's good enough for my purpose. It's good enough for costume purposes, in my opinion. I'm not making this to be stressed out about it. I just want to have fun and dress up at Disney, because I don't normally get to. Once I had both horns finished and I was reasonably satisfied with their symmetry, it was time to make them black. You could possibly just use electrical tape for this and just spiral around and cover the entire horn in that. That would give you that vinyl look from sort of Angelina Jolie's costume, but I didn't really want to go there. For one thing, I don't even know if we have electrical tape, but for another, I don't think that it would have the give and the stretch to really get down into those conformed complex curves again. So I wanted to have something that had a little bit of stretch and a little bit of give, but also was nice and firm and had a nice body to it. So I had a remnant of a black stretchy vinyl that I've been holding on to forever, just waiting for the right project, and this was perfect. I just folded the remnant over itself a couple times along the selvage. Then I cut off the actual selvage because that wasn't covered in the vinyl, and then I cut it down into several strips that were just over an inch wide. The cuts don't have to be perfect because you're going to be wrapping it around. They're going to be folded more tightly in some places and less in others, so they're not going to be symmetrical anyway. As long as your cuts are fairly smooth and even, not super jagged, you're not going to have to worry about getting these strips perfectly cut. Once I had several of my strips cut, I went ahead and took a very tiny piece of scrap vinyl and I glued that to the tip of the horn and sort of stuck the ends down just a little bit. Then I took my first strip and glued it over one edge of that tiny piece on the tip of the horn, making sure to angle it ever so slightly down into the horn. Then, working in small sections, I just used a little bit of hot glue, mostly onto the uncovered portion of the horn, with occasional little bits going up onto the previous layer of vinyl, and I just kept wrapping and gluing as I went down the horn. The stretch of the vinyl was very helpful. You're going with something where the top edge of each strip is a little bit smaller than the bottom edge, so giving it that little bit of tug was able to make it conform and wrap slightly around the horn, so you didn't have a lot of gaping pieces of vinyl sticking out everywhere. You can see the sort of wraps and folds and layers in a very vinyl-looking fabric on Angelina Jolie's horns in the movies. So I think that this really is a good material to work with and a good method to recreate it. When you get to the really complex curves and you're suddenly going from an outward curve to an inward curve, then don't be afraid to very carefully put a slight fold in your material. As long as you put a little bit of glue down in the folds and make sure that it ends up laying flat against the horn, then it'll be perfectly fine. No one's going to notice those little tucks and little pleats anyway, and they kind of just add to the texture of the finished product, which I think is a definite bonus. When one strip of fabric was running out, I would just run that down at an angle onto the uncovered portion of the horn. Then I would start my next strip going in the opposite direction up towards the previous wrap. That way, as I wrap around the next time, everything is covered and all the ends are tucked down inside. Once I got to the bottom, I made sure to leave some fabric hanging over the bottom edge of the eggshell. Then I cut off any of the extra that was hanging off. Then I ran some glue around the inside of the eggshell, again working in several smaller sections since you're dealing with those curves, and folded all the extra material down into the eggshell. That gave me a really clean finish along the bottom of the horn from the outside area where it's going to be visible, but it also gave a protective layer around that sharp edge of plastic that's going to be against my head. Then I just repeated the wrapping process on the second horn. Now that both horns are covered in the black vinyl, I need to actually attach them to a headband for me to wear. So I cut 2 strips of black craft foam for each horn. Since the headband is wider at the top and they were behind the ear, I made that one top strip for each horn a little bit wider and the bottom strip a little bit narrower. Then I glued one end of each strip to the insides of the eggshell, and then the rest of the strip was glued to the outside of the headband. That gave me a technically wearable piece with the two horns attached to the headband, but I didn't think it was terribly cute with those strips of black foam hanging out. So I decided to wrap the headband itself in some of the same vinyl as the horns. Starting at the bottom end gave me a little bit more freedom as I moved up towards the horn area to have somewhere to tuck the ends of strips in. I glued some inside the horn itself, some were under the neck strip, whatever you want to do, and that's going to change from place to place, how long your strips are, etc. As long as all your ends are tucked in and glued down, it'll be perfectly fine as long as they're not visible. When I got to the edges where the actual horn met the headband, I made sure to wrap the vinyl a little bit onto each of those surfaces. Part of that is to add some stability to keep the horns firmly in place, as I'm going to be wearing them in a crowd for hours at a time. But the other helpful thing there is that that's going to make it one more cohesive looking piece. It won't be so obviously two horns stuck onto a headband. It's going to look like one cohesive piece. They may not be perfect, but they were quick and easy and pretty affordable. If I had to recreate these right now with all new materials, it wouldn't be hard to find any of this and it wouldn't be terribly expensive. I'm very happy with these. I'm super excited about the party. Let me know if you've ever been and if you think these would be a fun thing to wear to the party. I'm really excited to hear about that. I hope you have a beautiful day and I'll see you next time.